Hi guys, Nima Ramani here, covering for Liana, and I'm so excited to be talking about Alex Murdaugh today with two very special guests. To my left, Mariya Melkonyan, former deputy district attorney, badass criminal defense lawyer. She's here to talk about everything in the Murdaugh case from fraud to murder. And of course, we have Nick Yasmin from our employment department and true crime aficionado. So let's get started talking about one of the biggest cases in recent memory, Alex Murdaugh. And let's start from the beginning. Alex Murdaugh was born in 1968 from a very distinguished legal family in South Carolina. His father and grandfather were both lawyers. He graduated from the University of South Carolina School of Law, and he practiced doing criminal defense and personal injury. So we can, really understand, his practice, and we can kind of delve into it. Uh, you know, he developed his reputation as a skilled trial attorney, but things went sideways pretty quickly when he was alleged to have been stealing millions of dollars from his client. But backing up to his personal life, he married Maggie and he had two sons, Richard and Paul. But in 2021, there was an incident, and Alex is alleged to have shot his wife and his son at his family lodge. He was arrested the following year, and he's faced 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of weapons possession. He pled not guilty, and his trial took place and was televised in January of this year, and he was convicted. But that's not where things end. It is up on appeal. The defense has filed a motion for mistrial. Let me bring in my guest right away. Mariya, wow. I mean, what can I say? You got fraud, you got murder, you have a boat DUI, you have alleged vehicular manslaughter. I mean, there's so much to cover. Like, what are your just general thoughts on the case and, how we ended up here? It's not really common for lawyers to be prosecuted for murder.
No, it's not, especially someone who has a background and kind of knows all about evidence and presentation of evidence, perhaps how to stage crimes, how to get rid of evidence. So it's very interesting that he, as knowledgeable as he would have been, found himself in that position.
No, I agree. I mean, and we're talking about a staged crime scene. His wife and his son, they were killed with two different firearms, something you typically don't see. Obviously, he understands cell phone and cell site evidence. Maybe not well enough because he did get caught in a recording at the kennel after denying being there. Nick, what are your thoughts? Was this the perfect crime, or was this someone that knows our criminal justice system but maybe didn't stage it well enough?
I think that while maybe he was at one point a very skilled criminal defense attorney, the way I see how this crime played out, it does not seem like it was done by somebody who could hide it very well. I think it was a very poorly executed crime. The more evidence you learned of it, the worse of a job he did in hiding it up. There was cell phone evidence. There were a number of witnesses who could testify against his alibi. They had him in a different pair of clothing an hour before. The list just goes on. He didn't do a great job.
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about some of that. The clothing, right? The defense really argued, hey, if he shot his wife and son at close range, there would be some blood splatter. There's no blood splatter on his clothes. His alibi was that he was at his mother's house. His mother has dementia. Not the best alibi witness in the world. But I think it was really that cell phone Snapchat video, I believe, of him at the scene. So here's someone who, gave a statement to law enforcement. Maria, I'm sure you advise your clients not to do that. But he's not your typical criminal defendant, right? He gave a statement, he denied being there, and all of a sudden there's a video of him at the kennel. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you, as a former prosecutor, anytime you have a defendant lying, especially in a recording, it's gold, right? Any prosecutor is going to use that to their advantage. And one of the things that, at least I, as a prosecutor, was taught to do is to highlight the confidence with which they are telling those lies and how believable they appear to be. And so one of the arguments we'll make is, look, he's coming up with these lies, and his brain is probably racing a million miles an hour, yet he's so convincing, and he's able to do so. So when you have that kind of evidence and then you find the lie, how do you believe this man later? So I think that's what really started that the avalanche, for him.
Yeah, man, I think the case really came down to his credibility. I was going to ask you guys. Obviously, he decided to take the stand and testify, and this is something I've seen. a clear shift over the years. I think when we started our practice, Nick, you're a little bit younger, but I think when Mariya and I started, criminal defendants would rarely take the stand. But now you're seeing this trend where more and more, I don't know if it's TV, I don't know if it's social media, they take the stand. And I mean, the issue with taking a stand in almost any case, if you're a criminal defendant, the entire case is going to come down to your testimony. And there's someone who took the stand, who testified, and I think he testified poorly. At least that's what the jurors thought. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I still would hold firm that it's always a bad idea to take the stand. I think in this scenario, he didn't have much of a choice because they had already caught him in a lie. He needed to get up there and not only admit that he made a minor lie to try to save the mountains of evidence against greater lies. I think they decided their only shot. It was never likely to work, but it was worth a shot in that circumstance.
Well, let me ask you this, Mariya. Obviously, you handle a lot of murder cases. You're handling them right now. You have a defendant like Alex Murdaugh, right? He's already caught at least one lie to law enforcement. Do you put him on the stand and subject him to that kind of cross-examination? Or do you try to argue the case, reasonable doubt, or, focus on the sloppy law enforcement investigation, the typical things you do as a criminal defense attorney? How would you defend this case?
So it all depends. There's never a black and white rule. For the most part, I'd say 99% of the time, you advise your clients not to testify if you believe that you can at least challenge the evidence as it is. However, in a case like this where you already have all the lies highlighted, where you already have all of these financial crimes that go to his credibility, it's very difficult to just focus on the weaknesses of the evidence, which the defense did, by challenging the way the investigation was done, how many people were at the residence right after the crime, instead of them closing it out and leaving it untouched. So they did do that, but I think, at the end of the day, they were left without a choice because all of the bad was already out. So when you make this decision, and I'm sorry, I'm taking a long time to answer this question. When you make this decision, you got to think about, if I put him on, what is going to come out? Because that's when they start impeaching him with all of these horrible things. If all of that is already out, then let's at least try to explain so that they can see the human side of him. And I think that's what they tried to do.
Speaking of the evidence, I really wanted to ask you, Mariya, about the evidence that did come in. Obviously, the defense really wanted to keep out any evidence of the financial crimes. And the judge ruled that they opened the door when they started cross-examining witnesses and saying, what motive did Alex have to kill his wife and son? And of course, the prosecution's theory was this was all a cover-up, right? He killed his family, so to draw attention from, this financial crimes hearing that was happening, I think, in a matter of days. So the question is, and really, did the judge make the right ruling? It was a pretty aggressive ruling, I'd say. It allowed a lot of evidence to come in, this kind of, 404B or whatever you want to call it, evidence of motive and intent. Do you think that's going to stand up on appeal? Obviously, we're going to talk about the mistrial motion, but let's just talk about the trial itself right now. A lot of evidence come in, and ultimately, Alex had to admit to all that when he took the stand and testified.
And correct me if I'm wrong here before I completely give my answer away, but the financial crimes were not resolved at the time.
No.
The trial hadn't come through. So the fear there is, what if he's cleared of all of these wrongdoings that they accuse him of? Of course, we all know that he's probably guilty of it, but he's admitted to it. We know he's done it. But if a conviction has not come through, if there's not been a jury decision, where do you draw the line? How do you know that these accusations are accurate? And so that's where I think the biggest concern is that the jury listen to something or hear something that ultimately drew a different type of attention to the client that maybe is not true at the time.
No, I agree. And look, when we analyze cases and we're looking at clients, I look at likability and credibility. And we've talked a lot about Alex Murdaugh's credibility, right? It was shot. But, Nick, let me ask you about likability. Now you have someone who's taken the stand and he's admitted, and there's many witnesses that testified, that he stole millions of dollars from clients. And not just any clients, right? These are clients that were severely injured. They've lost a loved one, some sort of wrongful death claim. He's stolen their money. It's on the heels of Tom Girardi. People already don't like lawyers, especially plaintiffs' lawyers who are thieves. So now he's completely not likable. Do you think that played a part in the jury's decision.
Yeah, I think it played an enormous part. As attorneys, we want our cases to be judged on their merits, not necessarily on the likability of the plaintiff, the defendant, whoever it may be. But the fact of the matter, or just the fact of life, is that people judge other people on likability more than probably anything else. I think everyone would be astounded when you speak to jurors after a trial about what swayed them most. You often get comments about like, "Oh well, I just didn't like the way that counsel carried themselves. I thought they were rude," and you're like, "Well, that's the biggest takeaway you had." Holy shit, that's not what this case was even about. Like it comes into play always, always. And another thing that this kind of segues into is when the judge allowed all of the jury to visit the home where the incidents were alleged to have happened. I mean, you're talking about like a 1,700 acre estate, and most of your jurors probably have nowhere near that amount of wealth. That creates a certain issue of likability of the defendant on top of what they're already dealing with. So yeah, likability was a huge factor there.
Yeah, you're talking about someone that has a lot of money and he's stealing money from clients, and it really kind of showcases his greed. So if you kind of go back and you replay the cross examination, so much of it was spent on those financial crimes. Alex Murdaugh stealing money from clients. It was kind of witness after witness, law partners, his accountant, coming in and they're talking about all these financial improprieties. So I'm thinking to myself as a prosecutor, all right, regardless of what happens with a murder case, you have a layup when it comes to the fraud case, right? He's taken the stand under oath. He's admitted to doing all this. And as a lawyer, it's really the cardinal sin, stealing money from your clients. And, kind of fast forwarding a little, just, a couple weeks ago, he decided to plead guilty to almost 24 counts of federal fraud charges. I think 22. So, I mean, I want to talk about the mistrial. I want to talk about the appeal. Even if that's granted, even if he gets a new trial in the murder case, he's going to do decades in prison as a result of the fraud. So kind of going back to you, Mariya, was this the right decision? Maybe, look, he cares about his family name and people not thinking he killed his wife and son, but this wasn't a really effective strategy if you want to keep your client out of jail.
I think it's smart for him to plead guilty now, and I'll tell you why. At this point, he's going to be in prison. So if he gets a conviction and a sentencing at the federal level, he begins to serve his time. So if they are sentencing him concurrently to his murder case, then he's doing the same time. So let's just say he appeals, and he's successful, then whenever his time on the federal case ends, it ends. However, if his murder trial does not withstand appeal and he still has to do time, at least he'll do both together. And if there is an issue of parole at some point, he'll be paroled out and not have to continue a sentence on the federal case. So I think it makes sense for him to do that while he's still in custody.
Yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with a fraud case, I really don't think there's any defense on the merits. It's obviously a much stronger case than the murder case. You have his admissions, you have, the electronic financial trail, you have all these witnesses who have come forward. So, and his co-defendant pled guilty and got 20 years. I would expect Alex to get at least that much time in the fraud case, just given the number of people he ripped off, the amount of the fraud, millions of dollars, and the fact that you're stealing from these very vulnerable clients. But Nick, what do you think the judge is going to do in the fraud case?
Is it the same judge?
It's going to be a federal judge.
Oh,
so.
okay. I think he's screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's already so much out. He's already been proven to be a liar so many times over. That evidence is already admissible, already public record. I frankly, I don't think he really has a chance.
And Can I add that it's also interesting how all of his financial endeavors have something to do with death around,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you have
Yeah.
him contemplating some sort of a suicidal, killing of himself to get insurance money for his son.
But yeah, let's talk about the different fraudulent scams. I think they're really interesting. But yeah, let's just go through them one by one.
Yeah, I mean, his son is potentially looking at a lawsuit, the one that he killed himself. He's looking at a lawsuit as a result of of this woman dying from a boat accident, and there's money involved with that. So that's horrible, not only for reputation purposes, but also monetary issues as well. But then he also contemplates this self-suicide by hiring a hitman to kill him. That also has to do with money.
Yeah.
Then we have this lady that works at the house, a maid, who miraculously falls from the stairs, which, from my understanding, was a very unlikely incident. And that involves insurance money conversations, at least. And he takes the money and doesn't give any to the other family. So everything he does has, all of the financial implications that we see in his doings have something to do with some sort of a death going on.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of going through that. You have the murdered son who's involved in this, boat DUI, kills a young woman. The housekeeper one's fascinating because they basically staged the case to establish negligence on his own part. So Murdaugh basically says that, his dogs were there, or somehow like something that he did caused the housekeeper to trip and fall.
But due to his negligence,
Yeah.
not I wasn't trying to
Yeah,
push down the stairs, but yeah.
Yeah, to basically fabricate this
Right,
negligent
yeah.
case. So, he stages this sort of negligence claim. He has his buddy sue him. So his insurance, his homeowner's insurance, tenders his liability insurance to his friend, and then he steals the money from the nanny. And of
Right.
course, the staged suicide is just super bizarre.
Then you add them all up, and it's like, how many coincidences with the same morbidly themed fraud scams can there possibly be? They can't all just be coincidence.
And it makes you wonder whether or not the fact that he, maybe I'm overstepping here, but the fact that he maybe got away with a staging of the housekeeper, that he kept on going because it worked.
Yeah. And, in the personal injury world, when something's staged, you see a car accident stage. I mean, this is like next level,
Yeah.
Staging, like actually a wrongful death case. I mean,
Right.
just-
That only a wrongful death plaintiff's attorney could try to carry out.
Yeah, and the surviving son is alleged to be involved, again, just alleged, in some sort of a vehicular sort of hit and run manslaughter, so that's still open. But really what I want to talk about, and I was just blown away. I don't know if it's true. Defense lawyers say all sorts of things, respectfully. But Murdaugh's defense lawyers filed this bombshell motion for mistrial, and they're alleging that the court clerk engaged in all sorts of misconduct. And they have 3 affidavits in support. I want to talk about some of the allegations. I mean, mind-blowing. Haven't heard of anything like this in my more than 20 years of practice. They're alleging the following. And supposedly, they have the declarations to prove it from at least one juror and one dismissed juror, that she told the jurors, this is the court clerk, by the way, who wrote a book, basically, don't believe Alex Murdaugh's lies. Don't let him mislead you. That's one. She's engaging in ex parte communications with the jury foreperson. She convinces the judge to dismiss a juror on the panel who apparently was going to vote to acquit. And then that she wouldn't let him take breaks at all until they returned a verdict, and they returned one in 3 hours. So if the allegations are true, I mean, you're talking about serious misconduct, jury tampering, someone that should be prosecuted, in my opinion. Or someone's perjuring themselves in those declarations. So someone's committing a crime.
I was going to ask the affidavits. Who are they from? The jurors?
So I haven't read them, but if I'm basically relying on what the defense has told us. I don't think they've been made public. The defense says that there's 3 affidavits, one from a juror, one from a dismissed juror, and one from someone else.
Wow.
So they haven't been made public yet. I haven't read them. I don't know if anyone has, but I'm taking them at face value.
Yeah.
If they are what they say they are, that's some pretty serious.
Yeah, that would be enormous if they are what they say they are.
So, I mean, the judge is planning to hold an evidentiary hearing. I think the court clerk needs to lawyer up. Obviously, the prosecution is saying that's not what happened. But I want to get your thoughts, Mariya. Obviously, you've handled hundreds, probably thousands of cases as a as a deputy DA, as a criminal defense attorney, I mean, we've seen a lot, but I've never seen or heard anything like this.
I've personally had many trials where I've seen court clerks, roll their eyes, hiss, breathe heavily, turn their heads, and they do it, I think, without thought, not intentionally, because they just react to the witness testifying or they react to photographs, and it's always alarming, both as a prosecutor when they are doing it sort of in my favor, if you will. It's not really in your favor. It's just a reaction to the evidence, but it's alarming because that if the other party notices that, or if that affects the jury, then your verdict isn't necessarily accurate, right? Because these are court clerks work with the judge all day, every day. They're in court. They're there when the jury is out and the defense and the prosecution are having legal discussions. They're there when there's a sidebar. They can hear closely. So they're privy to some very important conversations that the jury is not going to know about. So when the jury is looking at somebody who's in court and reacting to something, they trust that that person might know something that they don't. And so that definitely skews the viewer's, perception, I think, in whatever direction the court clerk can take them. And so that is very alarming. But in this case, you have actually somebody saying things like, potentially saying things like, don't believe anything that is just horrific, if true. Very.
Oh, yeah. And look, I mean, we're all lawyers. We have our frustrations with the court clerks, I mean, they act like they're the king or queen of the castle,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so, they do.
Yeah, and it can be frustrating. We expect judges to rise above it, not, reveal their hand, one way or the other. They're not supposed to comment on the evidence or say anything that might influence the jury. But you have this clerk that allegedly not only did this, and then wrote a book about it, all before the motion for mistrial was even filed. I mean, it's just insane. Have you ever, Nick, seen or heard anything like this?
No. I heard it for the first time from you just now, and that's actually pretty enormous news for this case. I didn't know that. Court clerks are given a lot of power from the judge. Oftentimes they do the judge's work for them. I've had judge's orders read to me over the phone from a court clerk, and I'm just supposed to take it at face value, like it's a written order. Yeah, I mean, they hold a lot of power. The judges entrust them with so much, so it's pretty understandable actually that they see themselves as people in a position where they're kind of allowed to do whatever they want in there, that they own that courthouse along with the judge. So wow, that's big news for that case.
Yeah, and as trial lawyers, it's really sort of your worst nightmare. Obviously, as a prosecutor, your worst nightmare is convicting an innocent person. But short of that is getting a just, lawful conviction. Then you have your jurors who are talking to the lawyers afterwards, and you're like, please don't say anything that is going to be improper, that's going to get this jury verdict overturned. And when you hear them talking about outside influences in that jury deliberation room, you're like, oh, this verdict's going to get overturned. And when that outside influence is the court clerk.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, it's really like mind blowing.
And then she wrote a book about it. I mean, we know why people write, books in those situations. Wow.
I would like to see whether or not these affidavits are supported by video evidence. I have found after I do jury trials that when you're talking to a jury, opposing counsel that's lost always tries to phrase these mishaps during the trial and getting the jury to say what they want them to say so that they can have something to file for a mistrial motion. So, it'd be interesting whether or not the truth comes out or the reality comes out the way that it's been alleged.
Yeah, that's a good point. They absolutely need to review the footage.
Yeah, the state is saying that's not how it happened. I think the judge has to hold an evidentiary hearing. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be interesting because, again, another case, but it's a big case we've covered here on the podcast, and it's Scott Peterson, who was obviously convicted for killing his wife and his unborn child. But there was a juror in that case, arguably a stealth juror, that arguably wasn't forthcoming during voir dire. She's asked if she was a victim of a crime. She had this restraining order. She denied it. And the judge wanted to hold an evidentiary hearing, and initially she wasn't going to testify because she got up there, she might admit to perjuring herself. So the DA's office actually had to give her immunity to get her to testify at that evidentiary hearing. If I'm advising that clerk, and now the defense is asking for the FBI to get involved because they don't want state officials who are investigating the case handling the potential juror tampering investigation, I don't think she's going to testify unless the state gives her immunity. And I think they have to give her immunity. So it's going to be fascinating to see if she testifies, if she's given immunity, and if she is, what she's going to say.
Well, I have a question then. As a civil attorney, what would you say on a civil end of things? Couldn't he sue her as well for tampering with the trial, and would they give her civil immunity in that sense as well?
Yeah, I think so. And the question is, though, I'm sure Murdaugh has to pay a big restitution award. So, whatever he's making, yeah.
Imagine that number.
Yeah, it's going to be, so, even if he makes money, it's probably hopefully going to those victims. I'm sure they're getting pennies on the dollar. And I wanted to talk about that just because, look, we're here in California, and it's going to be interesting what happens with Murdaugh. I think he's going to, one way or another, I think he's going to die in prison, either because of the fraud and or murder. But you have a different case, obviously, but one that affected us, which is Tom Girardi here. Really prominent lawyer, stole a lot of money from clients. And it's just kind of shocking to me, sort of unconscionable. You have probably the most prominent lawyer in South Carolina. Yeah, probably the most prominent lawyer in California, and they stole millions of dollars from many, many clients over the course of years, and no one caught them.
Girardi especially, who for decades was held out as like the attorney of the people. He was, the cases he would take on and went big on were very righteous, very just morally good cases, and then to become that. And it did turn out that the money he was taking from the clients were from those big cases. I don't know much about Alex Murdaugh's, history before this all came about, but
he was one of the biggest lawyers in South Carolina. Gillen, one of our colleagues from South Carolina, she's been covering this case, knows the family, and it's just amazing to me that really sometimes the bigger you are, the harder you fall, and this isn't the first, isn't the second, and probably won't be the last.
Oh yeah, far from the last.
But it's a really tremendous fall from grace. Now, Girardi hasn't been charged with any murders, but it's just interesting. That all that. Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's see what happens. I mean, he's trying to avoid a trial. He's arguing his incompetence, so that's a case we're going to be covering as well. But it's just interesting to kind of see it all come full circle.
Yeah. One of the things we haven't mentioned yet that was a big part of the Murdaugh case. Was his drug habit. Supposedly, by his own testimony, he was taking up to like 60 Oxycontins a day or something like that, spending $50,000 a week on drugs. I think also by his own testimony, that has implications from everything from motive to credibility to competence.
Yeah, the other thing that, and probably the only success the defense had is he did have an affair. They argued that was the motive for the murder. It was a little bit dated, but there was a lot going on in the Alex Murdaugh case in terms of the greed, drug addiction, extramarital shenanigans, a lot going on. But I think it's going to be very hard for the defense to win. In my experience, and Mariya, I want to hear your thoughts as well. I think the prosecution usually has the advantage when a case is retried. You can sort of prepare for the defense arguments. You can prepare your witnesses for cross-examination. You don't have that element of the surprise, I think. I think the jurors, even though this was a decided case solely on the facts and evidence in the new case, how can they not know that he was previously found guilty in the case? So,
I agree. This is the crime of the, decade, or I don't really know time-wise, but it's a big crime. It's a very big crime. And so everyone's talked about it. Everyone's read it. Everyone's watched it. I can't imagine a voir dire or a jury selection process where people are going to say, I haven't heard about it. And people haven't watched his testimony, which is the most damaging. Because if you have a retrial, say, for example, evidence comes, works out in your favor, and you decide not to put him up, how do you win? How do you win? It's very
especially
tough.
In South Carolina.
Yeah, I agree. A retrial will be great for the podcast, but I don't think it's going to be good for Alex Murdaugh. I think he's likely going to end up in the same position. And instead of being in state prison, he's probably going to be in federal prison, where he's going to be doing that time for that fraud conviction and sentence. But I'm so happy to have Mariya on the show for the first time. Nick, even though you've been here in the building, first time on the
this is
podcast.
my first time, yeah.
You guys, if you want an amazing criminal defense lawyer, trial lawyer, you got to look her up. Mariya, where can folks find you on social media?
I have my Instagram account, which is Melkonyan Firm, and it's spelled Melkonyan Firm, Firm. Melkonyan is my last name. Feel free to look me up online as well, Mariya Melkonyan. You can Google me, look at my website. I handle every kind of criminal case.
Yeah, and obviously, shameless plug, there's no better criminal defense attorney than a former prosecutor, and you're looking at one right now. So she's got a lot of experience. Definitely check her out. We hope to have you soon. We cover true crime here all the time. Nick, I'm glad you're a fan as well. Please come back to the podcast. Liana, we miss you, and I'm sure we'll have you back on the next episode.